Constantine was superstitiously anxious that God would hold him personally responsible for the divisions and quarrels among Christians. Thus, he and the emperors who followed him sought to secure agreement about the Christian faith. The struggle to attain the truth heightened the role of state power. It increased to be purely a matter and acquired a new political dimension. The symbol that East and West were headed in different directions came in 395 when Theodosius the Great divided the kingdom between his two sons on his deathbed. Honorius received the West and Arcadius the East. Justin ascended the royal throne in 527. Under his rule, the unique Byzantine blend of Roman law, Christian faith, and Greek philosophy with a pinch of the Orient came into being. He brought the plans of Constantine to conclusion, never disguising the Roman state tradition from Christianity. He considered himself to be completely a Roman emperor and just as fully a Christian emperor. The unity of the empire and the Christian religion was the source of his theory. He defined the mission of the emperor as the maintenance of the Christian faith in its purity and the protection of the Holy Catholic Church and Apostolic Church from any disturbance. He believed himself to be the servant of God and the executor of his will, and the empire to be the instrument of God's plan in the world. The early church had considered itself a living body, a new people, completely incompatible with any other people or natural community. All were called and could become members of this body, but even then the world would not become the church. Official Byzantine doctrine, however, compared the state to a body, not in the early Christian sense, nor because all subjects of the empire had become genuine church members. This figure of the imperial body arose from pagan thinking. The state itself was conceived to be the only community established by God, and it embraced the whole life of man. The emperor was the visible representative of God within it, who performed his will and dispensed his blessings. The old boundaries of the church were gradually removed, and the Christian community coalesced with Byzantine society as a whole. In Justinian's theory, the church almost dissolves in Christian society. The power of the Christian emperor, the state concern over purity of doctrine and popular belief in icons was as windows into the unseen world, resulted in the famous iconoclastic controversy. Thank you. The conflict over these icons, the disagreement over which things were sufficiently sacrificed or holy to deserve worship, raged over a century. Some said Christian clergy are set apart by ordination, so they are holy. Church buildings are set apart by dedication, so they are holy. The martyrs and heroes of faith are set apart by their deeds, and they are called saints. It was thought that they deserved the same reverence as the clergy. From the 6th century, the church and imperial government encouraged the development of both Christian icon making and the honoring of monastic holy men. They didn't realize that the uncontrolled multiplying of icons and holy men would make the people confine their Christian devotion to local shrines and figures. Most ordinary Christians failed to distinguish between the holy object or holy person and the spiritual reality it stood for. They fell into idolatry. Early in the 8th century, Emperor Leo III, 717 to 41, launched an attack against the issue of icons in an attempt to remove the empire's guilt. Christianity taught that God punished the children of Israel for their idolatry, and it was thought that the defeats and losses of Roman battles and territories, as well as a clamorous earthquake, were intended to bring God's new chosen people to their senses. Iconoclast, image breakers, wanted to replace the religious icons with traditional Christian symbols of the cross, the Bible, and the elements of the Lord's Supper. These alone should be considered holy. Beyond this, only ordained clergy and dedicated buildings possessed a kind of holiness. Riots began to break out as iconoclasts attempted to remove icons from church buildings, city walls, and public places. John Mansour, 730 to 60, also known as John of Damascus, was the greatest theologian of the 8th century. He explained that an image was never the same substance as its original, but merely imitated it. An icon's only significance is as a copy and a reminder of the original. To deny, as the iconoclast did, that any true icon could depict Christ was in effect to deny the possibility of the incarnation. Although it was wrong to worship an icon, the presence of an icon of Christ could instruct and assist the believer in the worship of the true Christ. Icons should be honored and venerated in much the same way as the Bible or the symbol of the cross, he said. John cleared the ground for acceptance of the icons of Mary, the apostles, the saints, and even angels. But the pictures themselves were only reminders to help the faithful give proper respect and reverence. The Seventh General Council of 787 condemned the whole iconoclastic movement and backed the position presented by John of Damascus. However, iconoclasm was not easily eliminated. But in the synagogue called in early 843, Methodius was elected as a patriarch who condemned all iconoclasts and confirmed the ruling of the Seventh Council. Differences between the Orthodox Church in the East and the Catholic Church in the West began to widen during Justinian's years and the iconoclastic conflict. The doctrines and practices of the two halves of the church drifted slowly apart. They quibbled about one word in the creed, insisted on different practices for Lent, and disagreed over the type of bread to use in the Eucharist. In 1054, Pope Leo IX sent Cardinal Humbert to Constantinople to work out an agreement with the emperor. The emperor was willing, but the Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael Cerularius, Hilarious, or whatever his name is, humiliated the papal party and provoked them into bringing the notorious bull of excommunication to the Church of Holy Wisdom. By the late Middle Ages, the original territories of Greek Orthodoxy were reduced to western Turkey, the Balkans, and Cyprus. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Islamic Turks. After 11 centuries, the original Christian empire was at an end, and Christians became a minority in a community run by Muslims. Without an emperor as their head, the people looked to the patriarch for political guidance. Muslims considered him the spokesman for Christian community. Today, only Greece and half of Cyprus are still Greek Orthodox. However, in spite of pressures from Roman Catholic Europe in the West and from Islam in the East, Orthodox Christianity expanded to Bulgaria through the conversion of King Boris in the 9th century, and Kiev and Russia through the conversion of Vladimir in the 10th. Over the years, Moscow gradually came to see herself as the leader of the Orthodox world. A theory developed that there had been one in Rome, in Italy, that had fallen to the barbarians and the Roman Catholic heresy. There had been a second Rome, Constantinople, and when that fell to the Turks, there was the third Rome, Moscow. The emperor took his title from the first Rome. The Tsar is the same word as Caesar, just as he had taken his religion from the second. The coming of the barbarians. The year 476 usually marks the end of the Christian Roman Empire in the West. The rule by the emperors had ended and the rule by German leaders began. The mercenary soldiers wielding the real power in the name of the Roman emperor were mainly German. Germans were killing Germans. The Romans called them barbarians because they spoke no Greek or Latin. For the most part, they were tribes from the north, originally in or near Scandinavia. Vandals, Franks, Angles, Saxons, Goths, Lombards, Burgundians, and others. When they started to give Rome problems in the 3rd century, their cultural stage was midway between a pastoral and an agricultural economy. Cattle, rather than money, marked the man of wealth and power among them. Roman historian Tacitus recorded that the Germans were notoriously heavy drinkers and gamblers, but he commended their courage, respect for women, and freedom from Roman vices. Their favorite amusement was listening to the tribal bards recite ancient tales of heroes and gods. Germans lived to fight. Every warlord had his own warriors, linked to their leader by a personal oath of loyalty. During the centuries, the Romans and the Germans faced each other. They had numerous contacts, peaceful, as well as hostile. Roman trade reached into Germany, and Germans entered the empire as slaves. During the troubled 3rd century, many barbarians were invited to settle on vacated lands within the empire or to serve in the Roman legions. By the end of the 4th century, the Roman army and its generals in the west were almost completely German. Late in the 4th century, the crisis of the invasion by the Huns resulted in the Visigoths, or the West Goths, petitioning the Romans to allow them to settle as allies inside the empire. Rome granted the request. However, corrupt Roman officials mistreated the Visigoths, and the proud barbarians went on a rampage. Eastern Emperor Valens lost his life and his army in the Battle of Adrianople, in today's Turkey, in other words, in one of history's decisive battles. It destroyed the legend of the invincibility of the Roman legions and ushered in a century and a half of chaos. Romans had withdrawn most of their troops from the Rhine frontier, and Britain, to deal with the threat and flood of the Germanic tribes moved across those defenseless frontiers. Burgundians settled in the Rhone Valley. The Franks spread across northern Gaul, and the Angles, Saxons, and the Jutes invaded Britain. Each of these several tribes set up a German-ruled kingdom within the confines of the empire. The invaders seized a great deal of land, but most of it was either vacant or belonged to the emperors. Few private landowners were displaced. In most cases, Germans still represented a minority and a gradual blending and fusing of the cultures. And the blood of the two peoples began. In time, the barbarians lost their Germanic customs, religion, and speech. The task of converting the northern peoples was enormous. To bring them to a nominal adherence to Christianity was not so difficult because they wanted to enter into the grandeur that was Rome, and they saw Christianity as being the Roman religion. But taming, refining, educating, and instilling Christian behavior in these people was a different story. The barbarians were brought to Christianity in two ways: directly from paganism and indirectly through Arianism, the heretical teaching that denied the eternity of Jesus Christ as the Son of God. Arianism was more ecclesiastical than theological, and Germans were not interested in the niceties of abstract theology. Their Christ was a firstborn creature, and they tended to think of him as a glorified warlord. Their churches belonged to the clan. Even after conversion of the Arian Germans to Orthodoxy, they still resisted centralization through Rome. Arian influence apparently began with missionary work among the Visigoths. Ulfilas and other missionaries led them to faith in Christ as Arius had preached him. The conversion of the Goths must have been more than a surrender to social pressures, because Ulfilas translated the Bible into the Gothic language, with the exception of the books of Kings, which he thought too aggressive for a people already extremely fierce and warlike. From the Goths, Arian Christianity spread to other German tribes. Some of the earliest northern peoples to come to Christ were beyond the borders of the empire and were not German. The Irish were Celtic people, and their conversion is traced to Patrick early in the 5th century. Patrick had been captured by the Scots when he swooped down on the English coast. His conversion dates from his captivity. The Lord opened to me the sense of my unbelief. He said, anyway, Ireland's the patron state. After escaping from slavery, Patrick returned to England. There he had a dream in which the babies of Ireland pleaded with him to come back to their country and tell them about Christ. He was sent out, some say with the approval of the Pope, to be a missionary to the Irish. The entire church structure in Ireland was monastic, presumably because the monastic community fitted the agricultural communities of the Celts better than the parish church system common in the Roman Empire. Ireland became the base for the evangelization of Britain. Celtic monks from Ireland and Britain also became missionaries to the continent, where they established monasteries in Germany, Switzerland, and northern Italy. These became centers of evangelization and devout learning. The Celtic influence and independent spirit of the Irish and British monks became, in a time, a disturbing factor to the Roman Christianity. Roman Catholic influence began in the northern half of Gaul, among the Franks, which is France, the one tribe destined to greatness in the shaping of Christian Europe. Their founder, Clovis, and he was 481 to 511, was the first barbarian chief of importance to convert to Orthodox Christianity. His wife, Clothilda, was a Christian and often spoke of Clovis about the one God, who created heaven and earth out of nothing and made man. Clovis replied, "Nonsense." However, he allowed their first child, a son, to be baptized. The child died shortly thereafter, and Clovis blamed the baptism. Another son was born, baptized, and fell sick. Clovis claimed the baptism would kill him. 2. But Clotilda prayed, and the baby recovered. Then, in a battle with Alemanni tribe, Clovis was on the verge of defeat. He cried, "Jesus Christ." Clotilda says, "Thou art the Son of the living God. Thou canst give victory to those who hope in thee. Give me victory, and I will be baptized. I have tried my gods, and they have deserted me. I call on thee, only save me." And the king of Alemanni fell, and his army fled. The bishop of Reims exhorted Clovis to renounce his gods. "Yes, Holy Father," said Clovis, "but my people will not consent. However, I will speak to them." And he did, and with one accord they renounced their German gods. 3,000 of his army followed him in baptism. The first of many mass conversions during the Middle Ages raises important questions about the paganizing of Christianity. Missions can proceed in 2 ways. One is the way of individual conversion with a period of instruction prior to baptism. This method was used by Protestant missions under the evangelical movements of the 19th century, and with their emphasis on individual change of heart. The disadvantage of this method is that the Christian converts in a pagan culture become uprooted from their own culture by reason of their faith. The other method is mass conversion, and this is the method that converted Europe. Kings like Clovis embraced the faith, and their people followed suit. These individuals were not uprooted from their culture, but it meant that the converts brought their superstitious behavior into the church with them. Clovis himself saw Jesus as a tribal war god. The Franks admired St. Peter, whose noblest exploit in their eyes was his eagerness to wield his sword to protect the Lord Jesus and to slice off the ear of the high priest's servant. This admiration for militant religion is reflected in St. George, a military saint who became the patron of England, and St. James, the patron saint of the Christian Spain in the struggle against Islam. The saints may have meant more to the people than Christ himself. St. Anthony took care of pigs. St. Gall looked after hens. St. Apollonia, whose jaw had been broken in the persecution, cured toothache. St. Genevieve cured fever, and St. Blaise was responsible for sore throats. Y'all remember all this now. For almost every human need, these slightly converted Germans could find a saint. Many tales circulated about the miraculous powers of the saints. The story is told of 2 beggars, one lame and the other blind. They happened to be caught in a procession carrying the relics of St. Martin. That's me, by the way. And were fearful of being cured and so deprived of their sins. The one who could see but not walk mounted the shoulders of the one who could walk but not see. And they hurried to get out of the range of the saints' miraculous powers. But poor fellows, they didn't make it. The conversion of the Franks provided passage through Gaul to Great Britain. Invasion of the Britain by the Anglo-Saxons made the idea of Britons evangelizing the Germans unthinkable. So in 596, Pope Gregory the Great sent a party of Benedictine monks to distant and barbaric England under the leadership of Augustine, who would become known as St. Augustine of Canterbury. These monks began their ministry in Kent under the favor of Queen Bertha, another Christian queen, eager to convert a pagan husband. Augustine secured a hearing with King Ethelbert. That's where this street got its name. But only out of doors where Augustine could be less able to exercise his magical powers. Rumor had it that he could make tails grow out of the backs of those who displeased him. Woo. The king was persuaded and granted land for the foundation of a monastery at Canterbury. Gregory appointed Augustine the first archbishop of Canterbury. Missionary thrust by Augustine to the north and by Columba to the south had converged by the time of King Oswy in the late 17th century. Oswy's queen was from the south and followed Roman practices, but Oswy received his Christian beliefs from the north and observed the Celtic way. There were many points of dispute between the two, including the date of Easter. Oswy brought the matter to the synagogue of Whitby in 664 and appealed to the authority of Columba regarding Peter, asking, is that really so? Does Peter guard the gates of heaven? Of course the Roman Columba agreed. Oswy wanted to take no chances alienating the doorkeeper of heaven and promptly agreed to follow Roman practices. The most famous British missionary in the Middle Ages was Winfrid, better known as Boniface. He was commissioned by Pope Gregory II in 729 to evangelize Germany and convert the pagan population. In doing so, he brought the British and the Irish missionary monks to their converts into closer relations with the Bishop of Rome. Boniface's boldness enabled him to win the masses to the faith and organize the district so as to leave behind a church structure bound firmly to the central authority of Rome. After his success, he traveled to the pagan fields of Frisia, or the Netherlands, and suffered martyrdom in the year 754. A famous incident tells of Boniface marching into a shrine in Germany, the sacred forest of Thor, the god of thunder. The cult object was a massive oak. Boniface took an axe to the tree, and so the story goes, as he leveled his first stroke, a mighty breath of wind from God toppled the tree. The pagans marveled and were converted. Boniface used the wood to build a chapel to St. Peter. You go, Boniface. Section 4, the Christian Middle Ages, 590 to 1517. Europe owes more to the Christian faith than most people are actually aware of. When the barbarians destroyed the Roman Empire in the West, it was the Christian church that put together a new order called Europe. The church took the lead in rule by law, the pursuit of knowledge, and the expression of culture. The underlying concept of Christendom, which united empire and church. It began under Charlemagne in the 8th century, but the popes slowly assumed more and more power until Innocent III in 1198 and 1216 taught Europe to think of the popes as world rulers. Later centuries, however, saw the popes corrupted by power, and increasingly militant reformers cried out for change. In the church had enlisted Celtic and Benedictine monks to serve as spiritual militia for winning the barbarians to the Christian faith. The papal office provided some stable structure for a new way of life. It read and recounted the ideals of Augustine's theology to maintain a framework of spiritual meaning. In his book, Pastoral Care, Gregory stressed that the spiritual leader should never be so absorbed in external cares as to forget the inner life of the soul, nor neglect external things in the care of his inner life. Using Jesus as his example, Jesus withdrew to the mountains to pray, and yet spent his life ministering to the needs of others. When Gregory died in 604, his epitaph proclaimed him God's consul, an appropriate description of a man who had exerted himself to the uttermost to be solely God's while ruling the church and the world like a Roman statesman. He combined great executive ability with warm sympathy for human need. If goodness is the highest kind of greatness, then the church moved rightly and according to him. The title, Great. Gregory was born into an old, wealthy senatorial family during tumultuous times in the empire. He was educated for governmental service. Rome changed hands over and over again. Invading armies brought devastation and fear. Intimate times of peace were few. The city of the Caesars was fast becoming the city of the popes, and it was Gregory's fate to appear at the hour of transition. Emperor Justin appointed Gregory prefect, or mayor, of Rome when he was 33. It was the highest civil position in the city, and the entire economy of Rome and its surrounding territory was placed upon his shoulders. Within a few years, he stepped down from public office and broke with the world. Upon the death of his father, he spent the greater part of his wealth founding 7 monasteries. He gave the rest of his alms to the poor and transformed his father's palace into a monastery dedicated to St. Andrew. Living a life of extreme asceticism, he ate only raw fruits and vegetables, prayed most of the night, wore rough clothing, and fulfilling the many duties of a Benedictine. He had never been strong physically, and now unceasing fasting ruined his digestion and played havoc with his heart. Yet Gregory looked on these as the happiest days of his life. In 579, Pope Pelagius II made him one of the 7 deacons of the Roman Church and sent him an ambassador to the imperial court in Constantinople. Upon his return, he was appointed abbot of his convent, St. Andrew. Early in AD 590, Rome was in agony. The city had suffered through tragedies of floods and the atrocities of war, only to be smitten with the plague. Men felt a little sore throat. Then came back the black eruptions and the swift death. Carts were piled high with corpses. People went insane. Pope Pelagius II died screaming in agony. Gregory was elected as pope, but he refused the office. He even fled the city and hid in the forest until he was found and dragged back to Rome. He began his administration with public act of humiliation because the plague had taken the life of his predecessor. 7 processions filed through the streets for 3 days. Prayers were said, hymns were sung, to no immediate avail. Then, mercifully, the plague subsided. A later legend traced the staying of the plague to Gregory's action and told of the appearance of the archangel Michael, who put back his drawn sword over the mausoleum of the Emperor Hadrian. Since that time, Romans have called it the Castle of St. Angelo and adorned it with the statue of an angel. Soon after Gregory's election, the Lombards laid siege on